this for charity. I was talking to my friend Amelia Boone on Tuesday to see if she wanted to run this week. And she's like, no, I don't think I can. I'm doing a 50K on Friday. I was like, oh, that's super weird. What race are you doing on a Friday? And she was like, the Dirty 30. And I was like, TJ is doing that. And he definitely thinks it's Saturday. So literally, no, this is Wednesday night. I'm like, TJ, and I also had an athlete doing it. So like, I was kind of like, maybe it's like a part of a festival, whatever. Like TJ's an adult man. He's probably got it under control. Like he's pretty pro at this. And then like my athlete had it in her log on Friday. Amelia Boone was like, yeah, it's definitely Friday. I was like, TJ, I think you need to start carb loading yesterday. And he had like just done a workout, had just gone to the sauna. Yeah, so.
Yikes. So it turns out not a grown adult.
Turns out the race is very much this morning. But, TJ handled it pretty well. Although I did get a call from a random number this morning and his brakes had gone out on the way to the race, like in the middle of the mountains. He was like, so my truck's not working. Anyway, I might need a ride. So
what an awesome way to end the week. Just so fun.
Yeah.
I feel like he's going to absolutely crush it because like, that's how those things go. Like when everything goes wrong, like you have an awesome day, like that, all that stress that's like building up is like going to be released on the race course.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I mean, you're already there. Like the truck's not going to get any better if you try to fix it now. Like, you've already, like, it's already a Friday, you're in the mountains, like do your 50K, man. So yeah, that's it's been very informative to see him. And like, he always kind of has had the perspective, like this is a training day. Cause like his big race this year is CCC, which is part of the UTMB series in Chamonix. So I think, being able to embrace that mindset of like, okay, this 50K is not the be all end all. If I'm able to like work through this stress and just kind of move through this, then it's going to be a really good training day. So yeah. Sarah, how are you doing? Oh, there she goes.
I'm doing pretty well. I think, like I would say I'm doing well. And then last night I was at Rev Run and people didn't know I had DNF'd. And so they asked, and then I had to like talk about it. And then I cried. So I think like mostly I'm doing well, but the feelings are still very much at the surface of having, had to drop the race. But yeah, I feel so good for having run 60 miles. Like I think one of the big of dropping
100K.
The race is like, I can dive back in, I think fairly quickly to my training for whatever, I don't know what for, but there will be something. And that feels really good. Like usually, like if I had pushed through, maybe I could have crossed the finish line on my hands and knees and then had a summer of recovery and not doing anything productive.
Like needed a kidney or something.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like really stoked about just like how good I feel right now at this point, a week out, and like what lies ahead. So that helps me put everything in.
Yeah. And I really loved the thing you posted on the Microcosm Instagram yesterday about processing a hard race. I know from my DNF at Leadville, a lot of people like super well-intentioned would just like ask about it. And like, particularly people like, I feel like anyone who's done like longer races, like they get it. Like sometimes you're just going to wake up and there's like some subclinical illness kind of thing going on where like no one should push through that. That is a bad idea in like all cases. I know for me, when I DNF'd Leadville, people were like, how'd it go? And event like a couple times I would tell people like, like I had to like get search and rescued at like mile 86. And people were like, oh, were you the girl in the space blanket? And like, I had like 10 different encounters throughout, the year, like after like, oh my God, I heard about, like people kept saying there were just two girls on the side of the trail in a space blanket. And I was like, yep, That's me. So it's, it'll be funny in 3 years. Don't worry. Time heals many, many wounds. All right. Looks like we've got all the coaches here. Let's dive right in. We've got some really fun questions today for Rapid Fire Friday. TJ definitely set us up for some awesome success. Yeah, I kind of like this. We'll just dive, we're talking about 100Ks, 100 milers. First question, should you run a 100K before attempting a 100 mile? Or framed a different way, what are the benefits of running a 100K before attempting a 100 mile? And how do you find the sweet spot for your training volume? Yeah, I don't know if any other, Sarah, this might be kind of a good question for you to tackle because you've done at this point several longer races. And I feel like we've been pretty intentional in that build up. And I feel like, yeah, you'd be great to launch into this one.
So I did not do 100 kilometers before I did 100 miles. 50 was the longest that I had raced. And I seem to do better with lower volume. When we increase the volume, I'm more likely to get injured. And I have found that I don't need the volume in order to run 100 miles. So, and I think, if we can, like have our bodies under less stress, we should. That being said, I think it's great to have a different distance race, sort of like what Zoe was talking about with TJ, like because he's got this earlier season race, he's able to have some perspective on it. And there's like good practice. You can practice all that fueling and whatever race, if you're going to run with poles, whatever it is. And then that way on the race that feels more important, you've got those things dialed. So I think there's definitely a benefit of racing a longer distance, something at least 50 kilometers. But yeah, I don't think you need to do 100K.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I know it depends on the athlete, right? It depends on like your schedule. Like for me, I don't tend to do things like 100Ks before hundreds just because like financially and time resources wise, that's not necessarily what I want to spend my time doing. I like to do at least like a 7 to 8 hour race in the build up to a 100 though. 50Ks are also great. But you definitely like 100K is not a prerequisite for a 100 miler. And it very much depends on the bandwidth of the athlete. Kind of no matter what on a 100 miler, you're stepping into the unknown. So like you can't minimize all of that mystery with longer races, but it is nice with things like 50Ks, 50 milers, 100Ks to start to really practice things like moving through aid stations well, fueling effectively, and kind of working on that like long day out mentality that can be useful for hundreds, but you really like, particularly if it takes everyone like a good bit to recover from a 100K or a 50 miler. So yeah, it just totally depends on the athlete, but I would definitely recommend having a longer race, at least 50K to 100K in the 6 to 8 weeks before a 100 miler. But if that doesn't work for your schedule, that's also fine. I have had a lot of success with like athletes like Sarah, just giving them like pretty big boot camps, and then just kind of going right into it. I know for myself, before I did Rio del Lago, I wouldn't even consider it necessarily a prep race, but I did Telluride Mountain Run in August, which was like a 12-hour race. So big day on feet. But not necessarily like, and then Rio del Lago is a super flat, fast 100. So not like necessarily perfect buildup, but it did really help me like practice fueling. I was anticipating Rio del Lago being hotter than it was. Yeah. And then, going into Western states this year, I did a 50-mile focused effort race. And I felt like that was really good for me because now I've kind of gotten to the point where 50 miles is like, my body's pretty able to recover from that in about a week. But, that is only because I've been doing 50 milers for several years. So if you're you know, if you take longer to recover from longer races, it's really about weighing those risks and benefits. But things that we're looking for are opportunities to practice fueling, opportunities to work on that long day out mindset, opportunities to practice, you know, like Sarah said, things like poles, things like all the things that you need to be successful in ultra, moving through aid stations, working with a crew. And again, you just have to balance that with like, how long is it going to take me to recover? What kind of time do I have? What kind of financial resources does it feel good to invest in this? And none of it's mandatory, but I would say 50K to 100K, ideal 6 to 8 weeks before a 100-miler. Any other coaches have input on this?
You girls really got it really thoroughly. I'd say like pros, like good things about that 100K would probably be if you're the type of runner that has a lot of anxiety about the unknown, and you understand the risks associated with the increased level of stress for a longer distance run like that. Maybe it could be helpful to just really kind of ease those 100-mile race day tensions or nerves or anxiety or whatever you want to call it. It's kind of like, not to bring everything back to a marathon, but if you're running a 26-mile marathon and your long run is only 18 miles, and, you know, obviously it leaves a lot of, 8 miles, a lot of gray area in a 26-mile run. So using that same methodology, 100K could be at least mentally beneficial in that 100-mile distance.
Yeah, for sure. Because again, like no matter what, you're stepping, like even if you've done a 100-miler before, like in no way does that guarantee that next finish line, like, and that's one of the things that like, I think we all love, hate about those longer races is like, when you just extrapolate things over the, the course of like 20, 30, 35 hours, it, again, you can show up and be the fittest you've ever been in like electrolyte balance. Like it just, it's never guaranteed. But, trying to increase, like, again, I think approaching training with like, how do I increase my chance of success, understanding that it's never guaranteed, but also not letting that necessarily deter you. Yeah, I don't know, Kylie or Kristen, if you guys have any specific input on this question as well.
I didn't have anything like different, but I do actually think that doing some races before you do a 100-miler is a good idea, in my opinion, just because I like TJ, you guys are saying about TJ, like practicing certain things and getting you, there's nothing in training you can do to simulate like a race situation, really. I mean, you can, but at the same time, it's still like a different level of like maybe things going on, etc. So it's like, I always think it's a good idea to do some kind of race thing if possible, but I don't think it has to be 100K. So, so yeah, I that would be my only thing, is like suggesting to maybe like get in a race or two just to kind of get in that environment, I guess.
Yeah. And I think, again, it depends on like, is there a 100K that's like a good fit for your training schedule and is on race similar terrain? Like, is it going to actually target those areas that we're looking to target? Like, you don't need to do a flat, fast 100K necessarily to get ready for a mountain race. Similarly, maybe don't do a super steep 100K to get ready for Javelina. And like for me, I like doing faster ultras like 50Ks and 50-milers because I'm trying to like, particularly going into a race like Western States, which is largely runnable, trying to spend a lot of time running and less time trying to work on things like power hiking and time on feet, which are, just not as trainable. Like there's much more potential on the table in terms of like improving running than improving fatigue resistance and power hiking ability. So, it really just depends on like what your goals are with the 100, what build-up races are available, where you're at in training, where you're at health-wise. And yeah, I think like with so many questions, and this is like why you work with coaches, the answer is it depends. Here's a 20-minute way of saying it depends.
I mean, that's where a coach can help though,
Yeah.
like if I've had athletes ask me about like, what do you think of this schedule or whatever? And I think that that's where we can provide guidance and So athletes maybe should consider asking your coach whether this fits in the overall training plan.
Totally. Yeah. Great point, Kylie.
I think to add on to that, if you don't have the resources to sign up for multiple races leading up to a big event, we as coaches can schedule in race simulations for your long runs. So that way you're still practicing fueling for race day, you're still drinking to thirst. You can replicate similar elevation profiles as the race, similar to what Zoe said. But I would also say that trying to replicate like the ratio of vert and mileage to the race that you're training for is going to be really important. So definitely talk to your coaches. That's why we're here, so communicate with us about that so that we can help prepare you.
Yeah. Awesome. Another great ultra question. I love all these ultra questions today. How much can I rely on aid stations in these long run races? And how much should I have all of my own nutrition prepared to try to get people to meet me at aid stations with refills or have drop bags at aid stations? I love this question because it's just like a 7-layer bean dip of it depends. So it depends on the race. It depends on the athlete. It depends on the crewing access. And it depends on what you eat. For me, it so depends. Instead of giving an answer, I'm going to try to give athletes a framework for assessing these things on their own. For me, I know what fuel works for me. I really like gels and Roctane. However, I have like a pretty solid stomach. So like I can just kind of dip into an aid station and eat stuff. Like if they have like a gel, which like almost every aid station does, except for like human potential races, which like, whatever. Yeah, Kylie gets it. There's like a race director in Colorado who is anti-carbohydrate, which like, race me would be my answer to that. Try to beat me. You choose the distance, John. High carbohydrate, 400-ish calories an hour. I can get that in kind of like any form. Unless the race is like really long, like I'm talking 10 plus hours with lots of power hiking, I'll like occasionally dip into some potato chip and like PB&J action. But a lot of races will typically have a gel option that works for me. So I tend to try to carry as much of my own gels as possible because I like to kind of just like have access to the stuff that I'm comfortable with, that I've practiced with. But you can also look at race websites ahead of time and see what they have and know if that works for you. So do that if you can, like do the research on the race you signed up for, see like what kind of most races on their website will say what they have, what they'll be stocked with at aid stations. You can typically tell from who the nutrition sponsor of the race is, like what they'll have, like maybe they're a Gnarly sponsored race or a Goo sponsored race or like V Fuel or Mirror. Man, Spring Energy come through with the Spring sponsored race. I would do that all day just for fun. If I don't have a crew, like if I'm doing a 50 miler on my own, I'll often have a drop bag so that because I eat a lot of food when I run, it would be really heavy and cumbersome for me to carry 7+ hours of gels in my bag. I'll often time out how much, like, okay, if I want to eat 4 gels an hour, it's going to take me 3 hours to get to that first drop bag. So I need to have 12 gels. And then I'll add in a couple extra, like, okay, if I'm having a good day, I'll need 12 gels. If I'm having maybe not the best day, let's throw 15 in there, just like to give myself some wiggle room, particularly if I'm not stoked on using aid stations for fuel. So that way you have some like margin for error accounted in your nutrition. And then I'll use a drop bag to kind of crew myself. So I'll often put like some flasks that have my favorite hydration mix along with my preferred sports nutrition. And I'll kind of swap out. Sometimes I've swapped out my entire vest, right? Like I just like throw a vest into the drop bag, put a whole new vest on that's like fully stocked and ready to go take off. I love having a crew just because of the psychological, more than anything, like I don't physically really need people to put gels on me. But I like the mental and emotional aspect of having folks like around me to lift me up. So if you have crew, that can be really useful because they can also like help you refill flasks. I mean, depending on the rules of a particular race, they can help you refill flasks. They can help you, get your nutrition in, hold you accountable for eating, things like that. But it just really depends on like how long the race is. I typically don't use a drop bag for anything shorter than a 50 miler. If it was like a loop race, I would maybe like use my car as an aid station or have a drop bag like at the hub that you pass through more than once. But it just really depends. Like, I think it just comes down to like, how much do you want to carry? How quickly can you get in and out of aid stations? Frequently, like, unless I need to refill water, I like to just buzz through aid stations. I don't try to like I don't, take the time to like get to know all the volunteers' names or whatever. I thank everyone, try to get through as effectively as possible. And I always make sure when I'm going into an aid station, I know what I need so that I can ask for it. Like, the wrong time to assess your needs is when you're in the aid station. As soon as you can see that aid station and it's coming up, you need to have your game plan so you can get in and out so you can ask for what you need. Same with like if you're being crewed, something that I really learned from ultra legend Jen Shelton is something that works a lot for me mentally, is really being the boss of my crew. Like, I don't want to just come in and be passive and have them changing things out. I need to be calling the shots so that like that cues my brain into being a more active participant in the race and not just being conveyed, telling people what I need, like kind of giving instructions and really taking ownership of that process. Kylie, this might be a good question for you as well, because I feel like ultimately it comes down to a lot of nutrition as well, and like what people are eating.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the main points about researching ahead of time. And I think the biggest mistake that I see people make is assuming that they can just use whatever is at the aid stations in order to fuel themselves without practicing. And that can, have huge consequences for GI distress later. So my recommendation, I mean, it sounds a little bit obsessive, but I do recommend dialing everything out on a chart ahead of time, and making sure that you break down your nutrition in that way in regards to calories, carbohydrates, your sodium intake and your fluid intake on different hours. Like, you don't have to say like hour 1, 2, 3, 4, like this is exactly what I'm going to do, but you should make sure you're dialing out hours, and that way you can form like little bags or things that you're going to carry, and you are confident that those things work together. For a lot of people, aid station gels and whatnot, the concentration of the drink mix might not be appropriate for them. People that are gluten-free have to be really careful with celiac. And then, the gels, I often see that one like, oh yeah, I can use any gels. I would not suggest just banking on you being able to use any kind of gels, because the type of sugar in the makeup of those gels is really going to, you need to look at how is that going to interplay with any kind of other food or any kind of hydration mix, etc., that I'm going to use. Now I will say, some people do have like more iron stomachs. Zoe, definitely for sure, with the fueling with, gel, the number of gels that you do for your 100 was amazing. But I have a lot of athletes that can't handle that. And so, making sure that you do have other food, like whole food options, or I do suggest like having a savory option that would like mix things up for you, that if you get sick of sweet things, that you can use. Again, like that's the important thing. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to rely on the aid stations and I don't do any of that work ahead of time. That's where you're going to end up in trouble. And in particular, like from 50K up, like it's going to be not a fun experience for a lot of people. So can't stress that enough. It usually gets more risky the longer things get. So
Totally.
that would just be my main points.
Yeah. And again, like you're just balancing a lot of different factors. Like, what do I need? What are they going to have? What kind of crew can I have? What are the drop bag options? I definitely don't necessarily like recommend trying to have like a drop bag that you're going to spend a lot of time. Again, like before you access your drop bag, you should know exactly what you're pulling out of there. And your goal should be to get in and out as efficiently as possible. You don't want to rush. You don't want to be making poor decisions. You don't want to be panicked. You want to have a plan, and then you want to execute it with calm and efficiency. This is also something we've been talking about a lot in our household because TJ is racing CCC this year. I don't know if anyone has ever seen the UTMB aid stations, but they're like giant tents full of hot cheese cubes. It's not necessarily in like bread products. European races definitely tend to have a bit more of a smorgasbord feel, which works for some people, but TJ is not a fan of the hot cheese cube fueling. So, we've been discussing like how I'm going to be supporting him and getting like his nutrition needs and kind of bringing what works for him, to the aid stations. And yeah, I don't know.
I have a slightly different opinion, Zoe. I agree with everything you're saying, except that in my personal experience, I've been burned a time or two at races that will list out what they've got at aid stations and where they'll have it, and it just not be that way. And so I've become someone, I think TJ mostly is similar on some of his shorter distances, where I don't rely on anyone. Like anything that I need on that course, I bring myself because I have control over. I'm not relying on, hopefully people I've never met before will have what they said they're going to have on a website that hasn't been updated in 3 years kind of thing. So I'm a little bit different in that aspect, and just try to make sure that, this race that I've trained months for, that I'm not going to leave it up to chance.
I am on the same page, Drew. I have celiac disease, and the idea, I'm racing OCC as part of the UTMB series in August, and the idea of a tent full of bread terrifies me.
It's gonna be hot.
Yes,
like hot, sweaty bread.
And hot, sweaty bread.
Getting fondled by everyone going through.
I feel like I will get contaminated just by looking at the tent. So I will have to carry all of my own things.
Yeah. And again, like it just is like, and that's the difference between like, if you're racing a 50K, it becomes much more, and if you're going Kristen pace, you're hauling ass, right? So like, you're not going to be out there for like a full day. So you're carrying slightly less food. You can move faster. If you're doing like a 7+ hour 50K, you might not be able to, like, again, like there's no right or wrong way to do this. You're weighing all of these different factors, particularly like if you have, celiac disease, high carb needs, some sort of other different nutritional thing, if you have a more sensitive stomach, if you're just the kind of person who's like pretty much out there to like Oreo buffet your way around the backcountry, that's kind of another approach. But I think the key like blanket takeaways I'm getting are: have a plan, do your research, and then have a plan. That's really the key. The wrong time to be thinking about this is like when you're rolling into an aid station, you're like, oh, maybe I'll have some potato chips. I feel kind of bonky. We'll see how this goes. Anyone else have anything to add? Awesome. What do the coaches look for in a good race or race company? What sorts of things besides course and distance do you look for when deciding what races to do? I love this question. For me, a big thing that I look for is does this spark joy? Like in terms of the distance and the terrain. I also am a huge fan of Trail Sisters certified races, because those races mean that women get equal, they're actually being really intentional about equity, particularly like saving room for women on the start line. I think every woman has the experience of having to freaking elbow their way. Like if you're a faster lady, and you just don't want to spend the first half of the race passing a bunch of dudes who overestimated their fitness for the race, you want to kind of be on that start line. You want to make sure that they have like women specific prizes, prize money, apparel, menstrual products at aid stations. All those things are really, really nice. So I really like to look for Trail Sisters certified races. I like to look for races that have an environmental stewardship component, that have a connection to the ancestral stewards of the land they're on. For me, I'm a super picky racer. Like, I don't like supporting companies that aren't in line with my environmental values, with my social justice values. I'm not a huge fan of races that don't intentionally make space for transgender and non-binary athletes, because like I pay for races with like my own hard-earned money. And when I'm investing in an opportunity like that, I want to be giving my money to a company that I think is in line with my values. And I know like this is something Drew and I used to talk about a lot in Arkansas, because there's a lot of like either nonprofit or for-profit races. And I think that that's a really good way of seeing like, okay, is this raising money for a cause that I believe in? That's really cool. Is this, and there's nothing wrong with for-profit races. I think particularly in Colorado, the majority of races are like larger companies. I really like races that support competitiveness. I'm not super into and this is just like, there's no wrong way to do this. I'm just sharing what my mindset is in the hopes that it can encourage everyone to explore their own values in a non-judgmental and authentic way. I don't like races that are like, oh, we're all just here to have fun, because like I am there to have fun. But for me, embracing my competitive side is fun, and not shying away from that and not diminishing my true self in pursuit of competition is very fun. I am particularly interested in companies that intentionally seek out and support diverse start lines. Mad Moose Events, I think, does a really, really good job. Their courses are always really well marked. I just like Aravaipa, I think also does a really, really great job. Like there's, again, like a for-profit company, but super, super pro in terms of fostering a really vibrant community and just like having great course markings, great aid stations, great finish line feels. So, outside of things like, where is this race? When is this race? Those are kind of like the basic level things. I'm really just looking for an event that's in line with my values.
I feel like I got to up my ante on choosing races, because I am far less picky and I'm almost embarrassed about it now.
Well, I mean, it also depends. Like in Arkansas, it's harder, like it's a smaller zone. Like Colorado, you have to be picky, because like you could do 100-miler 3 times a week, every week, your whole life out here almost.
Well, I think kind of like what you said, I pick my races. If you're going to set aside like course distance, my main driver is just local charitable initiatives. I understand like big nationwide charities, like if you're doing like Susan G. Komen or something, and that's important to you, sure, go do your thing. But I really like to, wherever I'm running, it doesn't have to be here in Arkansas, but wherever I'm at, I like for my race money to be nonprofit. That's a big one for me, and for that money to go to that local community. What local are they buying eyeglasses for the elementary students that can't afford them 2 miles down the road or whatever it is? It's trying to keep everything as local as possible is like my main jam.
I'm definitely, I agree with both of you. And I'm going to go a la carte here between what you both just said. Like cupless races are hugely important because I know they have an environmental awareness. I love Trail Sisters. I love that they have, a lot of times they have childcare at their races. So for moms who are, bringing the family along, that's an excellent resource to have. I also, living in South Dakota is tough. I feel like it might be very similar to Arkansas, Drew, where there's not a lot of races to choose from. And so with the ones that have been popping up, the Black Hills 100 series is starting to get really popular, and the race directors are hilarious, and they're trying so hard to be inclusive and create something special here in the Black Hills. And like, I want to support that. I want to encourage people to do that. I want to show up and be a huge cheerleader for them, because I think what they're doing is important. But as far as course markings go, I get very particular. There's one race in specifically that I will not do, the Moab Red Hot. Course markings are terrible. Like,
Famously.
and they own it, which is infuriating. I think it's definitely funny, and it's some people really like that. I'm not one of those people when I'm trying to run fast and feeling
The
lost.
ownership of that race has recently changed, and it's now owned by Mad Moose.
Oh, thank God. Okay, maybe I will do it again. I had like written it off after the last time I did. I was like, this is the third time I've done it. This is the third time I've been lost. I'm not doing this again. But yeah, trying to run fast and constantly feeling like you're lost is one of the most frustrating things, in my opinion. So course markings are a big deal.
Yeah. Kylie, what do you like to think about?
I just, well, being in the event production world for like since 2009, I put on triathlon for World Triathlon and marathons and shorter distance races and trail races. So I've been in the space. I really try to look for the organization of the race. Like, that's really important to me. Like, does this company have a good reputation in regards to like putting on events that haven't had like major issues in the past, I guess. And I do kind of use that as a determinant as to whether I really want to do it or not, because I think a well-organized race can really reduce stress levels for the athlete. So I do understand that like little things happen sometimes, but if there are major issues, like I also, with the Red Hot, I also got lost on that course. However, that the previous race director was really, really nice and did apologize and stuff. So I will say, like, just kind of looking at it, I don't want to be judgy, but looking at, people's past experiences and like how well things look organized on their website, etc. If they're responsive to questions, all of that kind of stuff is really important to me when I'm looking at ones that I want to do. I mean, initiatives as well are great, like you guys were mentioning, but that would just be my additional thing as to like that organization piece.
Yeah, for sure. This is fun to talk about because I'm in the process right now of working with Runners for Public Lands to develop a similar certification to Race Sisters, so that races can get certified as an RPL race, which would entail an environmental stewardship component, local economy development, as well as a recognition of ancestral land stewards. And again, like all of that stuff is super important to me. And we're working with both Jordan Daniel to develop the ancestral land steward component, and Mike Foote to kind of bring in that environmental stewardship piece. But yeah, I mean, again, like it all like kind of depends on like where you are. Like I know in Colorado, I don't know if I've raced a it's hard to find like a 100 miler. And like, especially if you like want to like, get into UTMB, get into Western states, you're getting kind of matriculated into like, there's not a nonprofit like golden ticket race or a nonprofit qualifier. So you do kind of end up existing in this world of like increasingly corporate trail running. And I think that makes it very important to think of yourself as an activist consumer. And if there is something in that race that you're like, that maybe doesn't feel as in line with your values, or you think can be improved, opening a line of dialogue with the event company in a way that's very respectful, like coming in hot to someone's DMs and saying like, your race sucked, I got lost. That's never great. But coming in and being really respectful and saying like, as someone who loves this community, I know you have like the toughest job on earth. I would love to see more. I would love to see a more inclusive transgender athlete policy, or I would love to see prizes for non-binary athletes who are racing. And I think that particularly as people who are part of the like more dominant culture, like if you're a straight white person, like it's often very important for us to be the folks who are speaking up and advocating on behalf of people of more marginalized identities. And yeah, that's just something I think about a lot in terms of racing. Yeah. Anyone else have anything to add? Cool. Let me find my notes. I have so many tabs open. It's not even funny. Sorry, y'all. Awesome. How long does recovery take after a 50K, 50 miler, or a 100 miler? I love this question because the answer is it depends times 1,000. It depends on how good your training was going into the race. It depends on how the race went. It depends on your stress background. It depends on how well you're eating, how well you're sleeping, how long the race took, what kind of terrain it was on, so many factors. Yeah, I think the best way to increase your chances of a speedy and efficient recovery are to train really well. Like if you're someone who's running like pretty low, or if you're struggling to run consistently and then you jump into a 100K or a 100 miler, it's going to take you a really freaking long time to recover because your body hasn't been forced to get really good at recovering through the process of running consistently and doing the higher volume. So, again, like just emphasize consistency in training. That'll make recovery from these races a lot easier. And I think if you're noticing that you really struggle to recover after longer and bigger efforts, that could be a sign that maybe that's not the most appropriate thing for you to be doing. Like recovering, no matter how fit you are, recovering from a 24+ hour event, a 100, that's going to be very challenging on your body, even for the fittest athlete, right? And some people are more genetically predisposed to have better recovery than others. But if you're really seeing that, like if you get into a 50K, 100K, 100 miler, and it just takes you weeks and weeks and months to feel good again and to get back into the swing of training and to mentally like wrap your head around running again. Like if you feel burnt out after that race, or you feel physically just demolished in a way that makes it really hard for you to kind of get back on the saddle, that could be a good sign that you're maybe overreaching a little bit. And it might be best for you to do shorter events, less long events, less strenuous events. And in getting more comfortable at those shorter things, you can eventually build up to that place where those longer things are less of a reach and demolish you a little bit less. And yeah, I think Kylie, you might have some really good input on this because I know like nutrition and stress can be a huge part of this recovery as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that oftentimes when people are building up for their big race, that's what they're just focusing on that. And then the recovery is like, oh, whatever, I'm not really thinking about nutrition for my recovery. However, it can definitely make a big difference. And I find a lot of athletes tend to restrict intake after an event, which I don't recommend doing. You just put your body through a lot of a big stressor, and it's going to need the nutrients to repair itself. So really focusing in, I like for people to think about bringing something with them, to like literally bringing a recovery thing with them in their drop bag for the finish, just so you can get something in after, even if you're not hungry, like a liquid option or something. And then I know like a lot of people aren't going to be hungry. So really you might have to like force yourself to eat like that first day or two afterwards. And then really listening to hunger and fullness after that, because that's where, again, people are like, well, I'm not doing anything, so I can't eat things, or I shouldn't eat things. That's definitely not true. So trying to really listen to your body there. I always suggest, you can do things like a serving of tart cherry juice per day after a race. You can do things like omega-3 supplements to help like just balance out that inflammation a little bit, because you're going to have a lot of high levels of inflammation there. And then something I found that really helps athletes too is I always talk about this, like a pre-bedtime high protein recovery snack. And that's something I have athletes do like 3 to 5 days after their event. So like 15 to 20 grams of like a high quality protein source before bedtime, whether that's like a simple protein shake or like yogurt with a little berries. And I know it sounds really simple and like it wouldn't make a difference, but it actually does for, it's kind of cool. I've had some athletes experiment with it. Makes a huge difference for people on sleep and like muscle recovery, etc. So even just like some little strategies to kind of to help with that recovery process can be beneficial. But I would say like the overall biggest thing to be paying attention to is not getting in the mindset of I don't need food, I don't need nutrition because I'm not doing as much. So I don't know if that helps, but
yeah, I think it's just so key for athlete. Like I'll often have an athlete racing their first ultra, first 50 miler, first 100. They're like, how long do you think it's going to take me to recover? And I'm like, I don't know. Like everyone's body responds to that stimulus differently. Like even TJ and I, both as highly trained athletes, can do the exact same race and our recovery will be really, really different because we are different humans. Yeah, like I know TJ tends to like, I tend to do quite well at recovering from these longer events. TJ struggles a little bit more. And that's not because he's not super fit and not super well trained. Our bodies just respond to that same stimulus really, really differently. But again, I think if you're struggling to recover from these longer events, big things to look for are how for like, and recovering well is a sign that you're fueling well, you're really like, you're doing great in your training. Yeah, but also like if you know, recovery can just take a long time. Like I know, like I was actually talking with Sarah about this after her Rufa event. She was like, man, one of the guys that I raced with, like he's doing 100 miler just like 3 weeks after we did this 24-hour event. I'm like, okay, well, this is a man you beat. So like, should we be taking advice from him? Maybe not. Like if you run harder, you're going to need more time to recover. And also like men can respond to that training stimulus differently. People like if they've been running for like 5-10 years longer than you, they're going to respond differently. If it was hot, they're going to respond differently. If it was steep, they're going to respond differently. If it was super runnable, it's going to feel different. So don't compare yourself to others, I think is a big key. Don't compare yourself to past versions of yourself. I've noticed my recovery after these long events has gotten significantly better as my body has gotten more used to adapting to that stimulus. But it still, you know, takes me a good bit to recover from a long effort because it's a long effort. So don't, you know, try to foist an arbitrary timeline on yourself, but really, really pay attention to sleep, to stress, to nutrition. And if you're just like totally demolished after a long effort and it takes you like weeks and months to get your training back on track, I think that's a really good sign that something needs to be kind of brought into balance. Do any of the other coaches have anything to add?
No, just to make sure you're giving yourself grace and understanding that your body has been through a tough effort and that you need to reciprocate by letting it rest. Obviously, it takes different amounts for different people, but something that I like for my athletes to do after a hard event is maybe not like do nothing for the next week, but go out on some walks, go out on some hikes, like just do something to be moving, but no running, right? We're trying to get you out so you can exercise and get fresh air and do what you can to help like your mental and emotional standpoint by, you know, being out. Like you don't want to be a hermit for 5 days or whatever, but also, yeah, just be easy and understand that it takes time.
Yeah. I always like to I always tell my athletes that they can be like, they can get outside, hike with their dog, do that kind of like ride their bike to the farmer's market. I always caution people, like, don't do anything that other folks would recognize as exercise. Because like, if you try to come back too fast, you're actually going to undermine your body's ability to adapt to that effort and you'll just end up setting yourself back. You know, something that I've really had a lot of success with in athletes who are well-trained and properly prepared for 100K, 100-mile efforts is you can actually use that really amazing aerobic stimulus from a huge event to kind of catapult after proper recovery, right? Proper recovery, proper nutrition, things look good. Maybe maybe we've seen a blood test, or we just like know from how we're feeling that like recovery is great, we can use that to fuel a really effective speed training block to kind of build off of. With other folks I've seen like who are maybe like it's a big reach for them to jump into a longer race. It can just take a long time to get back into that place where workouts and things feel good. And it's all about knowing like, oh, is this, you know, normal? Like, again, like everyone's going to respond to that stimulus differently, or like, ooh, is the fact that I'm really struggling to come back from this a sign that maybe it was an inappropriate race distance or intensity given my current fitness level? Maybe I need to focus more on getting that consistency in training so that these longer distances become less of a reach. And that doesn't mean we have to do like super high volume all the time by any means. It just means like, we don't want to be doing events that like totally, I don't know, are like an earthquake in our training all the time. Yeah. Cool. One last super fun question. I want to know if the coaches have 1 or 2 power songs they like for runs to get stoked to run. Drew, I'm going to pick on you because
no, what's funny is like, I knew that I would have to answer this question, and I just don't listen to music. I used to though, like when I lived in Bentonville and ran a lot and ended up running by myself a lot, I would listen to a little bit of, please don't judge me, like a little bit of Kanye West. Like he has a song called Lights that's older, not to date myself too much, but it just like
Kanye is ultra gold.
I would say it really got me going, but yeah, that's about it for me. Even now, like if I'm in a down spot on a run, I just don't feel good. Like for some reason that song will pop in my head and I'll like hum it to myself like all the time. I mean, it's been probably 12 years since I listened to that song while running, and it's still like my go-to jam.
I love that. Kylie, I know you're also not a big music runner.
I'm like, you're choosing the worst people to ask this question to, Zoe. I don't listen to music during or before running.
Wow,
so,
you're like born stoked.
I don't know about that, but yeah, I don't know. I've never really, like, even in high school and college, I never was like a music person in regards to like using it to get pumped up or anything. So maybe Sarah or Kristen is going to be a better person for this.
Kristen might have had to duck out, and Sarah also has power.
I'm here.
Oh, everyone's here. Okay, cool. Yeah, do you guys have?
I switched from desktop to iPhone.
So I mean, I would be like mortified for anybody to see my playlist, but I have spent decades curating them and they're just like absolutely amazing. But lots of 90s pop music and 90s grunge music, I would say get me through my runs.
Love that. Kristen, what are your pump up jams?
Mine are they vary, but yes, I definitely have a playlist full of like Hanson, Spice Girls, like very embarrassing, don't judge me, but they work. Lizzo also always works, and Ben Folds is like I've loved him. He was my first love, and I have this like auditory memory where I can literally like think of, even if I'm not listening to his albums, like the songs just go one after the other, probably because I've listened to them so much. But when in doubt, like Ben Folds always comes through.
Yeah, I'm similar to like, I've been working on my running playlist is like, I'm trying to get it to 500 songs before Western States. It's almost there. I'm at like 479, but I've been curating it for years and years and years. And it just gets gradually more ridiculous. There's like lots of trap, lots of Kanye, lots of just like random ass spin class style music. That's just like gets me hyped. But I feel like Lizzo is kind of my go-to. I feel like all that, good self-esteem pop is really, really nice. And I also love the song Yes Bitch, just like really gets me going. Yeah, I really like music that reminds me that like what I'm doing is inherently goofy and fun. And like, I don't need to take it super, super seriously. I also know TJ straight up listens to like jazz when he runs, and I'll never let him forget it because it's so weird. Like we'll be like on a road trip and like a really chill song will come up on one of my playlists. Like it'll be like a 10-year-old Arcade Fire song that's like 11 minutes long. And TJ's like, oh, this song gets me so stoked. Like I'm adding this to my running playlist. TJ and I are just like the opposite. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we can all share our playlists on the Microcosm Facebook page. I would love to see what other people are listening to. Yeah, well, this was an awesome call, team. Happy June, happy Pride Month, hashtag micro pride. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Wishing TJ good luck in his 50K, and good luck to all the athletes racing this weekend, doing long runs this weekend, just living life this weekend. Yeah, happy Friday.